3 and 4. Welcome to Story Time with me, Mr. A, and the conclusion of Michael Morpurgo's amazing story of Adolphus Tips. Friday, October 6th, 1944. Supreme, supreme. I feel supreme all over, because just about the best thing that could happen has happened, and it happened at breakfast time. I wondered where I was when I first woke up this morning. The window was in the wrong place. I was lying in bed, trying to work it all out, when I saw the writing on the wall. Then I remembered everything. I was home. I jumped out of bed and called everyone into my room to show them the message Adi and Harry had left. Of course I told them as I'd only just discovered it. Grandfather wasn't there. He'd already gone up to Uncle George's to milk the cows. All we talked about at breakfast was the writing on the wall. But we were in a hurry because Mum said we had to be up at Uncle George's as quick as we could. Lickety-split, she said, and helped fetch home the cows after milking. Anyway, we were washing the dishes when the back door opened, all by itself it seemed, and in she came, meowing and purring all at the same time, wandering under the table in amongst the chair legs, tail quivering with pleasure. Tips! Tips alive! Tips back from the dead! We were all crying, Barry too, and he doesn't even like cats. I put down some milk for her, and she lapped till she'd licked the bowl clean. She's a lot thinner than she was, and there's a scratch on her face which wasn't there before, but she's definitely Tips, my Tips. Green eyes, white paws, and all her black patches in the right place. And she purrs the same too. Mum said I didn't have to go with them to fetch the animals home, that she and Grandfather and Barry could manage without me, so all I've done today is cuddle Tips. I've played with her, fed her and cuddled her again. I think I gave her 10 months worth of cuddles in one day. She's come home, just like Adi said she would. I've looked back in my diary to be sure. These are exactly his words. She'll come home. That cat's a real survivor, sure as my name is Adolphus T. Medicine. So I've decided from now on she's always going to be called Adolphus Tips. I asked her, of course, at first, and she purred, so I know she's happy about it. Mind you, she's been purring non-stop ever since she came home. I think she's happy because she's got an important sounding name, and she likes to feel important. I keep saying it to get myself used to it, getting her used to it. Adolphus Tips, Adolphus Tips. It makes me smile every time I say it out loud, because it sounds so funny. And because every time I say it, I think of Adi. Just now I touched the writing on the wall before I turned down the lamp. I'm going to do that every night to bring him luck over in France, and I'm going to pray for him too, and then maybe he'll come back like Tips has, like Adolphus Tips has. That's the end of Grandma's entry now. So, and now, Bowie, over 60 years later, here's the beginning of the end of the story. Adi didn't come back, but there's hardly been a day since I haven't thought about him, and about Adolphus Tips too. She was already quite an old cat by the time we found one another again, and she aged quickly after her miraculous return. I think that her struggle for survival on her own must have taken a lot out of her, and giving birth to all those kittens too. She died peacefully 3 years later, and I buried her out in the garden. Gradually, the people moved back into the cottages and farms all around us. As you can imagine, there had been a lot of destruction. Hardly a single building had survived unscathed, and many were in ruins. The farms and farmyards were infested with weeds and rats, and there were rabbits everywhere, thousands of them. We ate a lot of rabbit stew. For a while it was a sad place to be, but bit by bit things improved. The houses were repaired, the farms tidied up. The church had been hit too, one of the walls blown out, so we couldn't use it for a while. I remember the first time the bells rang again. It was to celebrate the end of the war in 1945. That was the year Dad came home, and the year the village school opened again, and it was the year we got our generator too. Dad had worked a lot on generators in the army, so he installed it himself. We were one of the first houses in the village to have our own electricity. Dad was always very proud of that. Later on, generators became his business. He took over one of the barns as his workshop, and he supplied generators all over the country, all over the world. Mum and Grandfather and I went on running the farm together, and we were quite happy to be doing it. After the war was over, Barry went back home to London, back to his mother. He wrote to me for a while, but then we lost touch. One of us didn't reply, I don't remember which. He came back to see us, though, several years afterwards. He had his new wife with him and wanted her to meet us, and to show her the farm, I suppose. I remember I was even a little jealous. He still smiled the same, was still very sweet and kind. He told us over tea that his stay with us during the war had been the happiest time of his childhood. He's living out in Australia now, near a place called Armidale, in New South Wales. He became a sheep farmer. After his time with us down on the farm, he never wanted to be anything other than a farmer. We exchanged photos of our grandchildren at Christmas. I hope to go and visit him one day. We'll see. As you know, Bowie, Mrs. Bloomfield never went back to Holland after the war, but stayed on in our village as the school teacher. You came with me to see her once or twice, do you remember? She's in the graveyard now, not far from Grandfather and Uncle George, and Mum and Dad too, and now your Grandpa as well. I keep all their graves as tidy as I can, and I often put flowers there too. Snowdrops, primroses, bluebells, whatever's in season, whatever I can find in the garden. Sometimes we've done it together, Bowie, haven't we? Now to the end of my story. It was about 3 years ago. You had just gone back home, I remember, after spending your holidays with Grandpa and I. I was going for my usual walk along the beach, past the place where the old hotel had once been, when I saw a couple of men standing at the water's edge looking out to sea. I remember thinking it was strange because they looked a little out of place, not dressed for the beach at all. As you know, you can hear someone coming on those pebbles from a long way away. They must have heard me because they turned round to look at me at the same time. Both of them were very tall and both were black. One looked much older than the other. He had white hair and was carrying a bunch of flowers. Maybe this was something I'd always believed would happen because I knew who it was the moment I set eyes on him. It wasn't only my eyes that told me, it was my heart too. But he didn't recognise me. They turned away again, and as I watched, both of them began scattering the flowers into the sea, throwing them as far out as they could, which wasn't very far. So they soon floated in again on the waves and washed up on the beach. I knew the flowers were for Harry. I waited a while before I approached them, not wishing to disturb the moment. "Ady?" I said. He turned and looked at me. It was him. It really was him. "Adolphus T. Madison," I went on. "That's T for Thomas, Private First Class US Army." Then he smiled the smile I remembered. "Lily," he said, and we each took each other's hands, unable to say another word. So Ady and his son, he's called him Harry, came back to the bungalow and had tea with your Grandpa and me. In between the scones and the macaroons, Ady and I told one another the stories of our lives. There was a fair bit to catch up on, as you can imagine. We had a wonderful time together that day. Your Grandpa took to Ady at once, because Ady talked to him as if he wasn't in a wheelchair, as if he wasn't ill, and he always liked that, as you know. It was whilst we were talking that Harry told me that Ady had been wanting to make this trip all his life, to remember his old friend Harry, and to visit the farm again where Lily, the little girl with the cat, lived, and where they'd been made to feel so welcome. I'm going again. Harry had grown up with the story all his life. Ady's wife had died a year or so before, and he didn't want to leave it any longer. So we decided we'd just pack our bags and come right over, Ady said. "Say, do you remember that day we came visiting with the hot dogs?" We laughed out loud then as we recalled the great hot dog feast and Barry's face covered in ketchup from ear to ear. I told him that Tips had come back home in the end, just like he said he would, and that I'd renamed her Adolphus Tips. He said that it made him feel real proud to hear that. They drove away after tea was over and went to see the farm on their way back to London. I should have liked to have gone with them, of course, but your Grandpa would have been upset if I'd left him alone again so soon after my daily walk. But Ady and I wrote to one another after that, often. He sent flowers for your Grandpa's funeral, and then wrote to me afterwards saying that if ever I'd like to visit them in Atlanta, I'd be more than welcome. So I went, Bowie, and that's where I am now, in Atlanta in America. I don't think the two of us have stopped talking since the day I arrived. We have a lot of time to make up. And so when Ady asked me a week ago, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to say yes. We got married last Tuesday. Second time around, and I've married my childhood sweetheart. The church was full to bursting, and you'd never heard such wonderful singing in all your life. They sing with such joy over here, as if they really mean every word, every note. So I'm now Mrs. Madison, and as soon as the honeymoon's over, I'm bringing him home with me to live in Slapton. We'll be having our honeymoon in New York. Neither of us have ever been there, and then we'll be flying back to London next Saturday evening. We arrive at Heathrow Terminal 4 at 7:30. I'm longing for you to meet him, Bowie. You'll like him, I know you will. I hope everyone else does too. Be there if you can. I was there, of course. We all were. Uncles and aunties, the whole family. Some of them were still upset by the surprise of it all, but everyone was curious, me most of all. So we were all waiting for them at Heathrow, ready with confetti, that was my idea, as they came out of customs. She looked so small beside him. They were holding hands and smiling like two cats that had got the cream and were blissfully happy to be sharing it. And then I was shaking Adie's hand. "Hi there," he said, beaming down at me from a great height. "I reckon you gotta be Bowie, yep. You're just like someone I used to know a long, long time ago, except you're a boy, of course, and you ain't got no pigtails." After a while, Grandma led me away, her arm around my shoulder. "What do you think, Bowie?" she whispered. "Supreme," I said. "Just supreme." There's a picture of the happy couple. Alright. That's the end. Well, that was a lovely story. And thanks very much for watching and listening with me. And have a great summer holidays, all of you. And I'll see you back in September. Take care. Bye-bye.